World of Warcraft Cinematics, The Road to Legion panel.
Hello, BlizzCon 2015! I am so excited to be here. I hope you are too. Thank you so much for coming to the Cinematics Legion panel. We're going to get into the entire panel here. Hopefully everybody got a chance to see the cinematic during the opening ceremonies. Yes? Awesome. Well, if you haven't, I just want to call out, give a shout out to the theater upstairs. If you haven't gone up there, it's a 5.1 mix. It's really great. So take a look if you get a chance, all right? We're going to get into this Legion cinematic today, but before we do, a couple of introductions on stage. My name is Mike Kelleher. I'm a CG supervisor at Blizzard Cinematics, and I just want to introduce a few of our panel members here. First of all, to my left, Mark Messenger, the director for the Legion cinematic. To his left, Chris Tunig, our art director on the project. Next to him, Dan Cox, our lighting supervisor for Blizzard Cinematics. All right, now let's go over here. Seth Thompson, our environmental modeling supervisor for Blizzard Cinematics. Next to him, Mike Sandrick, our surfacing supervisor for Blizzard Cinematics. Vince Lee, our lead previs artist on the project. And down there in the end, Ricardo Bariba, our lead animator on the project. Awesome. Well, that's our panel. So let's get into it. We're going to get into the why and how we created this particular cinematic. But before we do, we should probably talk a little bit about how these things sort of come about. And that's sort of a different sort of scenario. We end up with, sometimes we end up with direction from the game teams who make the games that we all love to play. And sometimes not. Sometimes we get to do it on our own. But in this case, the WoW team had something very specific in mind that they wanted to accomplish with this.
Yeah, they did. They wanted the war zone. You know, they wanted you to feel like you were dropped in and you were right there at the edge of the Broken Isles about to storm the beach. And we were only too happy to oblige. We love bringing the spectacle. So we started to try to figure out what the action would be. But even as we were doing that, we were also kind of wrestling with what the hook would be, right? What the emotional hook would be, what makes you invest in this thing. We can do great action, but we want you to also be invested in the story and in the characters. And so we were looking at like war movies we liked and war tropes, and we started talking about the idea of letters from the front. You know, the letters home. It's kind of that why do we fight? What's worth fighting for theme. And we thought, well, what if it was like several letters mixed into the action? What if it was like, you know, maybe started with an Alliance footman who's on the brink of war and he's writing back to his family, you know, and maybe at some point in the action we transition to like an orc grunt who's, you know, charged with the defense of her village. And we thought, well, whoa, wait, maybe we even end it big. We end it with Varian finishing a letter to his son Anduin. And that got us pretty excited. And the more that we talked about that, the more it seemed like that was the thing to focus on. Because you guys know the relationship between Varian and Anduin is very important, very well known. And their ongoing debate about the merits of war versus peace are really integral to the story. So, you know, we pitched that to the game team. They were into it, and we started doing what we do. We got our broken old cork boards out of the closet and started sketching and pitching, and you know, just pitched it to the game team a bunch of different times. And when it started to feel like everybody was on board, then we brought in our storyboard artists and we started building the animatic, which you guys probably know is kind of the Bible that we go off of to make these movies. And even at that point, we got Previs involved and started doing some early kind of visual conceptual work, right, Vince?
Yeah, once you were comfortable with bringing the 2D storyboards into 3D space, that's kind of when the Previs team steps in. This is the stage in the pipeline where these conceptual drawings have to become realized with 3D characters interacting on 3D stages and being shot with cameras. And not every part of a storyboard animatic is going to make that transition perfectly, but we do try to preserve as much the storyboard spirit as we can, whether it's through composition or timing. And fumbling where I am, but one of these things that what you're seeing on screen is kind of a concept that was explored in Previs. The original concept board had the camera kind of floating above the deck and Varian comes out, but it was actually Dan who suggested, what if we follow Varian from behind? So we tried it in Previs and we showed it to Mark, and he actually really liked what it gave him, being able to see the expansive deck when we come out, being able to see down the length of the ship with all the life and the energy on deck before we go over the edge. So this is kind of how that shot evolved. I just want to talk really quickly about one of the unique challenges of this cinematic, which is that throughout the sequence, that gunship is actually flying towards the Broken Isles. You might not consciously perceive it, but at the end of every shot, we're closer to the Broken Isles than when we started. It's just one of those subtle ways that we do drama build. And the other thing that it gives us is that we wanted to feel right when we dip under the clouds and the way that the hair and the fire are being affected by the wind. And the truest way to get that is just to take the whole stage with all the actors and just shove it, and eventually just plummet it towards the surface. And without going too much into the technical stuff, it makes animation really difficult, and it makes shooting the stuff really difficult.
That's right. And now, so we have our idea of what Previs is going to be. We have kind of a what's going to be in the cinematic, but now we need to know what it looks like, and that's where the art direction comes in, right, Chris?
That's right. When Mark and I got together to think about the mood that we were going to go for, we quickly landed at the mental image of the Northern California coast on a cold November morning, and it was meant to be a little bit hostile. We wanted to make it clear that not only was the Alliance and the Horde going to fight the Legion, but they also had to fight the environment to some extent. Now, we knew we were going to have a thick cloud cover, multi-layered cloud cover with the Fellstorm at the center, but we also wanted to have opportunities for sunlight beams to penetrate the clouds, to give us opportunities for light pools, to carve out our characters, to peel them off the background, to stage them properly. And they were also meant to just move ever so gently, create ever so gently moving shadows across the decks of the ship. So we knew we were going to expose for the shadows. That meant that the highlights would burn out ever so slightly. And I would create little blooms around, for instance, armor glints or wave crests, things like that, just to add a little bit of brilliance to each frame.
Right, I like that cold, sort of stark beauty that we were trying for on that.
Got it.
Right, exactly. So we have these beautiful paintings done by Chris. These are just quick swatches, but now that we have our mood, so to speak, we can talk a little bit about where all this action takes place, which is the gunship.
Right, yeah, Varian needs a ship fit for a king, right? And we were only too happy to oblige. We love these giant flying fortresses that are roaming around Azeroth. And so we asked the game team, and they were like, yeah, you could totally do that. And in fact, since we were planning on crashing the thing, they said, well, you could probably customize it a little for your own needs, right?
That's right. They basically allowed us to crash it. They said, this is not going to be featured in the game, this specific one, so just do with it as you wish. So as we usually do when we try and translate assets into the context of our cinematics, one way to make it believable was to play with the proportions a little bit. So we elongated the ship slightly, and we also widened the bow just to make it a little bit more front-heavy, evoke the feel of a container ship or an aircraft carrier a little bit more. And then one thing that was important to me personally was just to re-envision the bilge, the bottom of the ship, in such a way that the propellers wouldn't feel stuck on, but the ship was conceptualized from the start as a flying ship. So we added these little port side receptacles in the bilge.
All right, so we have our concept here, as you can see, and actually this is just a little swatch that shows some of the materials that Chris had in mind for some of those pieces. And here we go. Here's our final turntable, just to show you what the final thing looks like. And actually, I want to turn it over to Mike Sandrick, because we have a lot of real-world textures and materials that are really on this gunship.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So anytime we do one of these cinematics, usually there's one or two assets that are going to be very technically challenging. And the gunship was definitely one of those. The reason why is that we saw it up close everywhere, and so we needed it very, very detailed everywhere. And what that basically means is that it's a very, very heavy model that took a long time to make. Just to put that into numbers, this model has about 7 million faces, polygons. It has about 3,000, 4,000 by 4,000 pixel texture maps on top of that, and then we ray trace everything. And that creates just a very heavy, very memory intensive asset. If you've got really sharp eyes, you can kind of see there in the bottom right, this asset takes about 4 to 6 hours a frame to render and about 20 to 30 gigabytes. But before we actually start any of this, we actually need reference to base this off of. And basically the direction here was 18th century frigates. We have the good fortune where we live that we were able to go down to the San Diego Maritime Museum for a day, and we got to crawl all around these types of ships and take all kinds of reference photos of them. It was great. Here's the texture team right now. It's Wei Wong taking some photos of the deck. So we just went and crawled around these ships, took pictures of the deck, the ropes, cleats, anchors, cannon, all these little bits of the ship that make it what it is. You can take a look at the decks of these ships. They're just really, really busy. We had to hand crate all of that, one piece at a time. And basically, this was all based on this reference that we saw. Seng Jing Song and Jung Ha Baek just did an outstanding job putting this together. That said, this is an 18th century frigate that flies. So our reference gathering didn't stop here. We also had to check out some museums and look at some World War II era bombers in order to get a reference for the engines on this thing. You kind of see here, I mean, if you go back, 50, 60 years, you get back to where airplanes were bolted together with aluminum plate and rivets. That's really the kind of the feel we wanted. Modern day planes are sort of put together with carbon fiber and glue. So this kind of reference basically just grounds the whole thing in reality. So it's a fantastical thing, but you believe it when you see it because it's based on something you know.
All right, so now we have our reference, and it's time to actually model this. And this is, Seth, this is where your team comes into play. And I understand you have a little bit of an Easter egg for us as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what you see here, this is our gnomish pilot, Remy Clutch Grind. And basically at the beginning of the project, we had some extra time, and we decided to model this out. And we were like, hey, can we find a place to put this in the cinematic? It's actually in the cinematic, so if you guys look the next time you watch it, you can find it in there. And before we do a little tour of our Alliance gunboat, I think Mark was going to give us some sound effects.
I do the sound effect? Okay, here.
Okay, yeah, that'll be good. So let's take a look at our Alliance gunship.
Okay.
So what you can see here is, over the noise of the loud helicopter blade, is we have these turboprop engines. On the side we have anti-aircraft cannons, we have retractable cannons. On the front we have this aerodynamically designed eagle prow. We have armor-plated 50 caliber cannons. We got hand-to-hand weapons, all sorts of stuff on the deck, all the clutter Mike was talking about. And now we're going to use our gnomish world enlarger, and we're going to zoom into the cabin here so that we can take a look at where Varian is at his desk at the beginning of the cinematic. And this will kind of lead into some of the art direction for the cabin here, and we'll kick it back over to Chris to talk about that.
Right. The cabin was actually envisioned at first as a much more expansive space. Mark felt, after looking at it, that really it should feel a lot more claustrophobic. So as the 3D animatics dropped in and the storyboards dropped in, we realized, you know what, all this space really needs to do is act as a backdrop to the character, so we designed accordingly. Now, if you look closely, you'll actually see that there's a number of items on the desks that have been reused from prior cinematics. There's the candle holder from Diablo 3, as well as the quill that Leah wrote with, so for the Hawkeyes amongst you. Now, one of the big items, a story point carrying item in this entire cinematic is the compass, and Mark's going to talk about that one.
Yeah, well, to me, the compass kind of is Anduin. It's like the talisman expression of a sun. And so it was a very important prop for us. But also, if you look at the concept art there, you can see LW inscribed there. And the intention was, this is Lane Rin's compass. This is a king's family heirloom passed from father from son, from king to king. So very significant and deserved a lot of love.
That's right. And because it's such an important story point, we researched a number of different application methods for the portrait. The Anduin portrait was going to go into the lid. At first we thought, wouldn't it be cool if it was just sort of a metal etching process they would have used, and would have ended up looking very monochromatic. But as we saw the shot, we felt, you know, what this shot needs is a little bit of color. It's a colorful focal point, so we re-envisioned it as a miniature oil painting, the same way you'd find it in an antique pocket watch or an amulet.
All right, so we have our portrait. We've talked about Anduin. We actually haven't talked yet about Varian. Obviously, he's the hero of the cinematic.
Right, yes, and there are a lot of Varians out there, right? I mean, there's all the wonderful artistic expressions of Varian done by Blizzard artists, but there's also comic book Varian, right? And there's the in-game model of Varian, but there's also the Lords of War Varian, which is somewhat different. Not to mention all of the great fan art that's out there. There's a lot of great Variants out in the world, and so our challenge was to try to take what we thought was what would encapsulate into the best variant for this cinematic, right?
Right, and now we have Chris. This is your portrait of Varian. Tell us a little bit about it.
Right, so, you know, as it just so happens, whenever we get to re-envision a character for our cinematic context that hadn't been featured in a pre-rendered before, we just jump at that. So for this occasion, I felt, you know, it would be good if the things he'd been through in his life, at some point, Varian was a gladiator, he lost his memory. I mean, this guy has seen a few things. If that was represented in his appearance a little bit, taking all the other depictions, the prior depictions of him into consideration, of course. So I went for a little bit more of a chiseled look, you know, a little bit harder, just to get that point across. And if the other big challenge we had, here you see the 3D model. The other big challenge we usually have with our characters is, and this happens especially in the World of Warcraft universe, is translating the character proportions into the pre-rendered context in such a way that it remains practical and it remains believable. So there was actually quite a bit of back and forth between the animation team, the rigging team, and the modeling team to try and work out the size of the shoulders and the size of the knees, etc., so it would actually work in the cinematic without too much interpenetration.
Okay, so we have our concept for Varian, beautiful painting, and now we need to turn it back over to Mike Sandrick and talk a little bit about how this was created from a surfacing perspective.
Yeah, so even though Varian is a bit fantastical in terms of proportion and facial features, we still needed this grounded in reality so that you'd believe him when you saw him on screen. And basically that meant for us basing his texture maps, his shading, on real people. So basically our reference, we went around the office and we took as many pictures as we could of as many 40-something-year-old white guys as we could. Mike Kelleher,
that's a beautiful
myself,
forehead.
I'm gorgeous.
included.
I gotta say.
These are the closest up photos I've ever seen of myself. It's hard to look good this close. But the beauty of these photos, these are about 6,000 by 4,000 pixels and only a portion of the face, is that it captures all the wrinkles, the pores, the zits, the pock marks, chicken pox scars, all that stuff.
Hey.
And basically, that's what makes skin look real. And that's what we basically did. Then our texture artists, Sam Alicia and Wei Wong, took these photos and projected those on our Varian model, and then did a extensive cleanup after that in order to fit the actual facial proportions. But if you zoom in here, you can see all those sort of busted capillaries and beard stubble and sort of the discoloration of the skin. A lot of that is not hand painted. A lot of that is coming from those photos, and then we clean it up afterwards. That saves us a ton of time, and that also just makes it look a lot more believable because we're starting from a photo. Here's just a little hint at the kind of resolution that's on Varian. All those texture maps, there's 20 there. Those are all 4,000 by 4,000 pixels, and those are only the color maps that go on the head. There's actually about as many texture maps on Varian as there are in the entire gunship. Here's a quick look at the hair layout of Varian. Varian's got about as many hairs on his head as a real person. That way it just sims and animates more realistically. We did do one cheat where all the hair that's growing off the scalp ends in the ponytail hair holder, and then we grow brand new ones out the back end, and that just guarantees that when it's animated, it's always locked in there. And yeah, here's Varian all put together. Just like the gunship, this is a very heavy render. These take about 4 to 6 hours of frame and take about 20 to 30 gigabytes of memory to render. Very heavy. That's not only because of the heavy model and the heavy textures, but we also have hair all over it. on the clothing and on his head. We have beard stubble, we have peach fuzz. All that adds render time, and then we ray trace everything. Everything is reflecting everything else. Even the skin is subtly reflective, so you can get that skin glow that you see on real people. And basically, all of those things combine so that you create something that is believable when you see it on screen.
And once you got your star and you start putting them in front of a camera, one of the most important decisions we're going to make is what lens are we going to shoot them with. So one of the visual aids we have to guide us are called lens tests, and you're going to see a series of them on screen right now. And it might look like it, but Varian isn't animated right now. He's in a key pose, and we're just cycling through our lens kit for the show, going from wide to longer. And I think you can notice how his features are kind of changing depending on the lens. And so we're basically just trying to find Varian, much like a live-action actor, we're just trying to find his beauty lens, the lens that really makes his features the most flattering and just not flattering or unflattering. And we're weighing at the same time kind of the emotional feel we're trying to get from a shot. And part of that goes into his relationship with the environment, which changes as we go from a wider to a longer lens. These are just some of the questions that we ask ourselves as we make this lens choice.
Yeah, we carry these lens choices all the way through production as well. It's something that Vince and the previous team do with Mark early on in production, but as you get all the way to the end and you start adding surfacing on things, and we get into lighting and compositing, that's when we kind of start picking things like f-stop. We're going to decide how much depth of field we're going to put on the lens, with the chosen focal length. And we try not to unrealistically do that. You can in the 3D world, you can break everything and turn knobs all you want. But we actually shoot reference and look at it and say, okay, well, if we were to pick this focal length on a camera, what would the restrictions be in terms of the f-stop I would need? Or if you're really shooting for depth of field, if that's what's important, what are those limitations? And there's a finite amount of choices for those. And we're constantly trying to stay in the real world with those choices to help add to the realism. And other things we do to these shows as well when we're doing this lighting is that we try to add other photographic elements that are more subtle, that you don't really think about. It's things like lens distortion and chromatic aberration, which are considered artifacts, really. As you can see here, you can see the distortion added in and the rainbow effect at the end. I'm kind of breaking it so you can see what it is the actual chromatic aberration. And that's kind of where different color light wavelengths travel at different speeds through a lens, and when they're on a wide-angle lens, when the harder the refraction angle is, the focus is slightly different. A perfect lens, all the light wavelengths would focus on exactly the same point, but the imperfections in the lens is what causes the character. So we actually, normally, if you're working on a film and in visual effects, you try and take that stuff out. You're constantly trying to get rid of the artifacts. For us, since we're full 3D trying to create something more photographic, we actually add them back in. So we do things like that. Other little things you might notice is the interior shot stuff in the cabin has a much denser film grain than the exterior stuff, which you would also run into low light in situations if you were to film it. So we add a lot of these things to try and add to the realism as much as we can.
All right, so we have our cameras, we have our main hero, and what we have to talk about now, Ricardo, is performance. And actually, that's where you come in.
Yeah, Mike, when we first heard that Varian was going to be the main hero of our cinematic, we were really excited about bringing such iconic Blizzard character to life. And when we were looking at the storyboards, we right away realized that Varian, he's going to go through a really wide range of emotions, and that's going to require some really subtle acting. Like Sandrick, mentioned before, creating a realistic character in CG is a big deal, and bringing that character to life, it's really hard. So for this show, we decided to work close together with an actor, and we were fortunate to have Jim Peary helping us bringing Varian to his full glory. So the process of working with Jim consisting in placing dots on his face, and that way it would be easier to the animators to follow his movements. And once we get that working, we will shoot reference using a helmet camera like this one. Once the whole process was done, the animator was able to, very close, study all the subtle nuances of Jim's performance. You can see all the eye darts, the muscle movements, the blinks, even the subtle skin sliding. And one thing that I want to point it out here, that we didn't use motion capture. All the animation for Varian was keyframe. So ultimately, it was up to the animators to transform, Jim's and Varian, grabbing what's the best of his performance and trying to make it unique to Varian. So here's the final result for this shot.
Awesome. So we have our performance now. We're ready to go, but the cabin sequence is done, but we have to go outside of the cabin here. We have to talk about the deck of the ship, and as you can see here, this was one of our shot 140, we called it, and you can see this has a lot of stuff on it, and Seth, that's where your team comes into play again.
Oh yeah, so the top of the deck, we had over 50 different unique assets in there, and we just have tons of stuff. You can see some gray shaded models here, not only weapons, but we have stuff like buckets, things to help fill out the scenes. And then you can see some shaded versions of the stuff that Mike's team did here. And the idea behind this is we wanted to just put as much stuff on the deck as possible to make it look like those 18th century ships that we had reference of. And the other thing, too, that we do here all the time in the environment team is we create what's called a modular asset. So you see these crates, we might actually put that in the cinematic and repeat it 100 times. And the viewer can't tell the difference. And then it helps save time with our budget by creating more interesting stuff that the viewer's eye will see to make it feel more realistic.
Right, so we have all these items on the deck. We're trying to make it feel as live as possible. And actually, Vince, it's a good time to mention our maybe a little bit of a secret weapon here.
Yeah, we're really fortunate to have this motion capture camera system. Here's a video of me and Mark demoing it on screen. It's taking this really intricately detailed set that the modeling and surfacing teams have made, and Mark, with that shoulder-mounted apparatus, I can just drop him right onto the deck of the ship, and he's able to just walk around and scout in real time, changing lenses, basically like a real-life, live-action shoot. And at any point, I could hit play or record, and all the animation that Ricardo's team just brings that deck to life. And every little micro movement that Mark makes is being recorded. So all the little camera shakes, tremors, or overshoots on subjects when you pan or tilt, it's all captured. And it's used to really great effect in the cabin section of the cinematic, actually, because Mark is in there shooting and he's reacting to those explosions coming from outside and doing a little bit of that subtle sway that really sells that you're on a seafaring vessel.
Right, so we have some of that motion capture, but as you mentioned, Varian was a keyframed animation, but we did have a chance to use some motion capture on this show, right, Ricardo?
Well, we knew that we were going to have to animate, like hundreds of different soldiers for the deck. And the reality is this kind of like thing to populate a deck like that with that many guys running around, pushing cannons, marching can be very time consuming and expensive. So in this case, we felt that motion capture was the right tool for the job. So we partnered with our friends from Activision, and we used their motion capture facility. And here you guys can see like some of our animators having a good time. Everyone was really excited about that. And we needed to be creative. Like right there, have like a cannon. Here we built this platform to have the guys sliding. Yeah, everyone was having really a great time. And on the next slide, you can see Joe Frayne. I don't know if Joe is out there. But Joe is one of our layout artists, and this moment here, he's performing the moment when the Inferno hits the deck, and there's this major explosion. So we were really, thankful that Joe did 110%, and we were really excited to see how the final performance was going to look on the cinematic. That's the next frame.
Okay, here we go.
That's the moment when Joe gets hit.
Awesome.
Yeah, so unfortunately, since we couldn't see in its full glory, we decided to do like a quick video for you, Joe, and say thank you and share with you guys. Right there in the back, that's Joe.
And the cannon covered him up.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it, right? Yeah. But we also use keyframe animations for things that we obviously couldn't get, like motion capture to work. This was like one of the early tasks that Davey, one of our animators, did. And everyone fell in love with this animation. It was really cool. But unfortunately, we couldn't find the right spot on our cinematics to put it there. So we needed to, unfortunately, we couldn't use it. It's like a good example of how if the animation doesn't work for the story, if it doesn't move the plot along, we can use it.
But we wanted you to see it here.
Yeah.
It's fun.
It's just good that we cut it before Joe volunteered to mocap this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope he signed his liability forms. All right, moving on. We're going to go on and we're going to talk about the deck. The deck is obviously live, but that's not the only thing in the shot. And I just wanted to take a moment to shout out to the effects team who created this beautiful water that you're seeing below. They did a great job. The effects department integrated that incredibly well with the Digimat team, which you hear about later. They were called on to do an enormous amount of water. You can see some of those passes here. We have water scenes, we have boat wakes, white caps, mist, and not just above the water, but also just below the water as well. We hear some of our early tests of trying to get that feel of a wave crashing into a shore, and they did a phenomenal job. We had a lot of good reference I'd like to call out Seth. Thank you, Seth, for doing our bubble reference.
Don't try
here.
that at home, it's a little dangerous.
Yeah. Here's one of his tests, and the effects department was able to replicate that out just great. This is one of my favorite takes. Let's just put this on the screen right here.
That is so epic. Look at this man kill water.
Kill it! Angry! All right, so we use that reference. We started off with some simulations here from the effects team. I believe that's Gromosh Hellscream there, but even before we had a Varian, we used one of his models just to try and get the look and feel. And as we go through, here's some of the tests that you can see. And finally, the final shot here with all the water and the sword effects included and everything. Great jobs, and hats off to the effects guys for doing that. Great job. All right, so we're back to the scene, and I think we have a little bit of an Easter egg down there.
Yeah, we got a little goblin tugboat that we put there, and if you look closely in the cinematic next time with the tiny magnifying glass,
Did you not see it? Did you not see it?
It's in there. Also here you can see some stuff we recycled from other cinematics. This one actually is the Alliance ship that we did originally from
Cataclysm.
right?
Yeah, this was based on the Maiden's Fancy, actually.
Yep, and here you can see it being destroyed in that Booty Bay cinematic there, and then now you can see again, Mists of Pandaria cinematic. We use this again, both of those ships. And the thing about this is we built the back of the ship out to look really good. However, in this cinematic, we get to see the front of it, so we needed to put a lot more detail in. So we went through, in about a week, one of our modelers added a bunch of really cool detail. We recycled some pieces from our Alliance gunship, put it on there, added textures to it, and here we can see it in the final shot.
So what I'm getting is it only took you about 6 years to model one ship.
Right, yep.
Awesome.
Very good, very good.
So lots of ships, obviously, on the ocean and up here, but we actually have one more ship to talk about, and that is the Horde airship, which is appearing out of the clouds here. For the Horde, yes. And we go to Mike Sandrick here for a minute and talk about that.
Right, the Horde airship, obviously is architecturally very different from the Alliance gunship. It's a much cruder, much less refined way of manufacture, and we felt that obviously needed to be represented in the model. One thing that was really important for Mark was to find an interesting way to introduce it. So it pushing through the clouds, we actually took one of the defining features of the game model, which is the wolf head, and reinvented it in such a way that we really tried to work out the silhouette to get the read just right as it pushed through the clouds.
All right, so now here's our 3D concept of that. And now, actually, I can go to Mike Sandrick, and you can talk a little bit about where the reference came from this, a little different source.
Sure, Mike. So taking our cue from Mark and Chris that this should be a cruder design, Eddie Kim and Nathan Boyd kind of went back in time, and instead of 18th century frigates, they used 10th century Viking ships for their reference. Now, an interesting thing about this, it might look about as detailed as the gunship, but actually it isn't. We basically just concentrated the detail on that starboard bow section that you mainly see in that cinematic when you first introduce Sylvanas.
And right, and that brings us to Sylvanas.
Sylvanas.
Oh, that was
Yes.
a great applause for Sylvanas. Another major character we haven't actually done in a pre-rendered cinematic, and that means we get to go back to art direction and really talk about Sylvanas here.
That's right, and we ran with it. Sylvanas, such a beloved, such a well-known character. Her being an undead high elf, we really wanted those trademarks, those features to be represented properly. So we just went for some slightly wide-set eyes, very high cheekbones, and a very pointy chin. One thing that I felt was worth chasing, just to echo a little bit of what we did with Varian, was to add just a little bit more chisel in his face, maybe a tiny bit of maturity. So that's what we went with. Once again, the other half of the equation is the armor, and here we felt this is an opportunity to maybe recreate a little bit more fitting attire to the occasion here. She was going to be in one of her big battles she was ever going to be in, so we actually went in there and created an armor for her, added a midriff for her, but still tried to harken back to the outfit that she's so well known for. So, the shoulder.
That's kind of her battle armor,
that's right,
really.
Battle armor.
Yeah.
You got it.
Right, and here she is, her final turntable. Obviously, all of her materials applied. And that means, Mike, she provided some different kind of challenges for the surfacing team here, right?
Yeah. Young women in computer graphics are notoriously difficult to do. The main reason is that the detail on young women's faces is just much more subtle. If you kind of remember Varian's face, you know, he's got beard stubble, he's got large pores, he's got wrinkles, he's got pockmarks, freckles, zits. I could go on. Scars, obviously. There's all these things that you can sort of hang on to create reality. Women have all of that, but it's much more refined, much more subtle. It's all got to be there. You can't just have it be smooth, but it's difficult. It's even difficult to talk about. It is. It's a hard thing to do. But basically what we did is we went right back to photo reference again. This time we had a couple women volunteers in the studio, and we took high resolution photos of their faces. And then Nathan Boyd, who did the look dev on this, did a fantastic job. Projected this on our Sylvanas model and then cleaned up from there. So you can kind of look at this. Obviously, a lot of it is fantastical, but the poor detail that you see is from photos of real people. And here's the finished turntable. Another interesting thing to note, you know, you kind of see that red subsurface in her ears. That's to give the illusion of blood flow. It's the illusion of red blood flow. I'm not really sure what color her blood is, but giving the illusion of red is what really the audience expects, because that's what you see when you see backlit ears or backlit fingers. And that just helps sell the reality when you see a fantastical creature like this on screen.
All right, so we have our other actor, and Ricardo, now we have to make her move, and we have to make her move believably.
Yeah, Mike. So the thing is, every time we animated one of our Blizzard characters, we want to make them, you know, like bigger than life. We want to make them epic. But on the other hand, we also know that we needed to make it grounded in reality. You know, otherwise nobody's gonna buy it. And the thing about Sylvanas is that knowing there's such, you know, like so many fans out there that love her, we knew that we needed to get it right. So unfortunately, nobody in our crew was like an expert in archery. But luckily, one of our animators, Glenn Ramos, he introduced us to Anna Maltese. I think Anna is out there. And Anna is like an amazing performer. She's like a martial artist, you know, like archer. And she was kind enough to spend the day with the animation crew, shooting reference. But also she was like teaching us, you know, like the proper grip, how to hold the bow, the right stand. And I think that's what makes the difference, you know, like grounded Sylvanas movement and reality. And one other thing that I want to point out there is every time we tried to make, you know, like look like Sylvanas was working with Varian, because I felt that was like a very important piece of the cinematic to get, you know, like to show that they were like together in a common thing.
Totally. Teamwork on this one.
Yep.
And I just wanted to do a shout out to both Anna and Jim Peary, our actors, for doing such a wonderful job, not just giving us the big action stuff, but for, you know, providing a lot of really great little subtleties of performance, just little pieces of gold that might be hard for us to mine on our old. So can you guys give them a round of applause real quick?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic,
Guys.
Great work. Sometimes that's the most important stuff, actually. So we have our heroes here. We have Varian, we have Sylvanas, but we actually haven't talked about the bad guys, and that's obviously the demons. And the first one up is the Infernal, and we wanted to give the Infernal a big entrance again.
Yeah, we haven't featured an Infernal probably since the original World of Warcraft trailer. So we were very excited to give him a big entrance, have him claw his way up out of the deck with the smoke fuming off, and the green fell. And the fell really is kind of a unifying thing for all of our demons, right?
That's right, Mark. The demons were really meant to feel like they're part of a team, and we used the fell fire, the fell energy, as a unifying factor to do that. This was obvious for the Infernal, but then for the Fell Guard, actually the design work that we got from Team 2, from the game team, really helped us quite a bit. If you look closely, there are actually little distorted faces of, you know, unfortunate tortured souls that have been absorbed into this guy's armor, the enemies that he defeats. So we used those mouths and those eyes as little Fellfire furnaces to get those team colors in there. Now for the Fellbat, we had to just be a little bit more subdued. We just pulled back ever so slightly because there's a lot of them in every shot. And if you overdid it, you'd just have a lot of green dots flying through frame. So really we confined the Fellfire to the chest ridges, to the facial area, obviously, and to the roots of the dreadlocks.
All right, that sets out our villains, and now we have all our actors on the stage, and it's now up to the Digimat and lighting teams to really take us home and put these characters in an environment. Dan, that's where your team comes into play.
Yeah, early on we knew that the cinematic was going to take place in 3 main stages. There was going to be the cabin sequence. We were eventually going to have most of the action happen out in the air, and eventually we would end up on the reefs leading up to the Broken Isles. And as you saw, the cabin was all modeled by Seth's team, done fantastic when we lit that. Jason Fleming did a really great job of lighting, compositing that. Anthony Efticari and Fabio Zangroni, our 2 Digimat artists, did an early test on the skies to figure out what could we do 2D versus 3D, because 3D is very expensive, 2D is not so much. And so what they did is got a lot of photographic reference, both some they took and different resources, and built out a 3D setup using 2D images in our compositing software, Nuke. And it proved to be very promising. As you can see here, you're getting tons of parallax, and it's actually quite difficult to do if you've ever worked with clouds in 3D, so they did a really amazing job. And here's some of it in shot. You can kind of see this is the fly-through attacking the gunship, and you can watch here, we've done a little breakdown. So this is kind of the 3D that the lighting team would add back on top of that. Kaz Shimada did a really nice job of lighting and compositing this shot. And eventually we knew we were going to go to the Broken Isles, so we needed to reveal. This is the base Digimat that was provided by the guys for kind of everything we would build on in shots. We knew we were going to see it at slightly different angles, different cameras, but we just needed a base to go from. And eventually we would supplement this with 3D elements and effects and everything else. So that's what this was, and eventually the ocean would marry into that. And this is the reefs leading up to the Broken Isles. Seth's team, modeled all the reefs. Mike's team shaded everything, and then we've added the Digimat here so you can kind of see what it would all look like before the action takes place, because it's going to end up being this crazy, crazy shot.
Dude, I still remember Mark's pitch for this thing. He came up as like, we're going to finish strong, boys. We're going to take every asset we have on this show. We're going to throw it at our heroes. We're going to see if they can fight through it all, which they can't because there's so many, but then they're going to try anyway and see if they make it to shore. It's going to be epic. It's going to be in one big shot.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Actually, Blizzard has a company policy where after pitches like that, you're allowed to go back to your desk and cry for about 5 minutes. After which we got back to work and we sat with Mark and we figured out what the important points were. Basically, we got to see the heroes, we got to see the villains, and they got to look insane. We got to see the Broken Isles, even closer than ever before, but so far away, and we want to finish with a bang. We drew straws, and Don Ta was the lucky previs artist who got to bring this shot to life. And he went through, brought his limitless energy, exploring so many iterations of Variant's choreography, the formation of the fellbats, the creation of the rocks, and the placement, and the wave timing, basically solving all these problems early on so that later departments wouldn't have to. And when Mark was pretty happy with it, we went to Ricardo and we said, it's your problem now.
It's very kind of you, Vince. Yeah, so this shot was crazy. I can't remember when was the last time we had this many characters interacting with each other and with the camera at the same time. So whenever we have a shot like that, like our first instinct is to go outside our office and try to gather as many animators, like slash ninjas we have in our studio. We place them all in our like live action reference room, and we start shooting reference with them. We probably did, hundreds of different takes for this shot, and you got the best piece of each one and compile them together. Since this was kind of like a complex shot, we decided that the best way to approach it would be splitting in 3 different animators. So I had like Dave Saab, he was in charge of the variant and the foreground. I had Corey Pelton, he was doing the Infernos and the fellbats in the background. And Alon Hellman, he was doing all the bats for this shot. I think by the time Alon was done with this shot, he was our bat specialist. Yeah. So the other interesting thing about this shot that I want to point out is that the first version that we did, and we show it to Mark, Varian was like stepping on the rocks, and right away he was like yelling. And Mark, like he saw that animation, was like, hey guys, I can buy the fact that after, like Varian did that whole thing, he doesn't take a minute, he doesn't take, like a step, breathe a little bit, and yell from the top of his lungs. So I thought it was kind of like a cool detail that helped bring this shot to life.
Thank you for that, Ricardo. Yeah.
Very nice. So the hot potato goes from previs to animation, and then after all that work is done by rigging and sim, and we get all that great work compiled in one place and we give it to the team. And Dan, it's on you.
Yeah, I'd like to give a huge shout out to the lighting, Digimat, and compositing teams on this show. They did an extraordinary job, and I mean, a shot like this shows that off. And Shenzhen, our lighting lead, was my right hand. The whole project was amazing. And when we get a shot like this, we've talked about previs, animation, modeling, surfacing, everything's going down this pipeline, and eventually they dump it in our laps and say, make it work. Luckily, their work is so good, it makes our job easier. And Enrique Munoz, our lighter compositor for this shot, took it on and put everything together, and it was really nice. We were able to decontrast the thing, make it a very warlike feel, handheld camera, throwing water on the lens, all the tricks we talked about earlier. And it all really came together and gave just a nice, really big moment. You don't always get to lead up to a big moment to end, but we got to here.
Yeah, moments, that's exactly the thing that, when I see a shot like this, I think about what our goal is to, work together, to collaborate. Everybody brought their A game to create this moment. That's what we're looking for, is to make you feel energized or make you feel excited. Maybe we can thrill you with a moment. Maybe if we're really on our game, maybe we could touch you in some way. That's what gets us excited to come to work every day. That's what gets us energized. So, we want to thank you guys for your dedication to this game and for your love of this, world that we all call Azeroth. Thank you very much. And while I'm thanking people, I got to remember the sound department, because sound is, I've said it before, sound is half of the equation at a minimum, right? These guys totally acquitted themselves beyond it all on this show, and I'm so very, very thankful for the work that they did, from the music to the sound effects to the mix. Fantastic work. So thanks to the sound department.
Absolutely. And I'm going to throw a few more thank yous out for that as well. I'd like to mention our video and post-production group, which is responsible for taking this and putting it on YouTube. Actually, frankly, they're responsible for most of what you're seeing on stages today, so that's fantastic work. Our localization team for turning this from an English into 10 other different languages. World of Warcraft is a global game, and we're really proud of that fact. And I want to thank everybody here. That's our panel for today. So, thank you. We've left a little time for questions. If you have a question, our panelists here will be happy to set up here. Please come to the mic. We know that your time at BlizzCon is incredibly precious. There's so many things to go see, and we're happy that you spent some time with us today. Thank you, and have a great BlizzCon 2015.
Hey guys, I just wanted to say you did an amazing job with that cinematic reveal. My question actually is about the Gamescom trailer, where we got to see Gul'dan revealing Illidan is back in the game. Now, you talk about sometimes reusing assets. Illidan's model, now was that, I know we didn't get to see much of him, but was that an updated model of the Burning Crusade cinematic model, or was that completely done from scratch?
I can answer this one if you want to take it. Okay, so I can say that with certainty that we looked at the model, and actually there was a little bit of a scramble when we realized, like, oh no, we need Illidan again. Where is Illidan? I'm not sure. And there are a lot of email trails trying to find him. And actually, I want to say that Xin Wang, our character modeling supervisor, happened to just have one in his pocket. And we took it from there and up-resed it a little bit because it needed a little bit of love.
Just one thing, it's rare that we can reuse an asset verbatim. Standards and technology change so fast that even if we do reuse it, it's usually always redone to a higher standard.
Was much texture work done with putting textures on Illidan because he was, a silhouette? Did much work get put into that?
Luckily, not much, because we didn't have much time. So it was mainly the tattoos.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is one of my favorite panels every year I come to BlizzCon. I have to see how you guys make those beautiful cinematics. So thank you very much. I know the whole crowd appreciates all the work you do. I noticed that it starts with Varian being very kingly. He's very much King Varian Ruin. And at the end, he's back to being Lagosh. He's stripped down of all the armor. It's just him fighting, which is his initial element. Was that intentional, or like the character arc? Or?
Yes, and thank you for noticing.
Cool, that's it. Thank you guys very much for putting those details in. I appreciate all the work.
Thank you for coming.
I guess I'll just say it again, like the two before me, great job with everything. It's amazing to see all that up there. My question is, what made you guys finally pivot from the grunt stories, as it were, back to Varian and Sylvanas? What made you finally decide to go with him rather than them?
I think it really was just that moment where we started thinking about what if Varian could communicate one last time with Anduin. If he thinks that he's going off to war and he thinks that maybe he's not coming back, then it just made sense, that he would want to have this communication. And, the father-son thing, I think, a lot of us are fathers and mothers, at Blizzard. And so, I think the parent thing just really spoke to us. And it seemed like it'd be a good heart to what would otherwise be a big action spectacle.
And I think you didn't mind echoing the Lich King theme a little
That's
bit.
true. That's true. We definitely were, the Lich King looms over me all the time. I'm like, how am I ever going to do anything that great? So it's like, my son, I'm going to grab that,
It's true. He talks about it all the time.
All right, thank you very much.
Hello, my name's Keaton. I was just wondering if you were always originally going to put Sylvanas in there, or was there something else? And what do you think she's thinking when she's looking across to Varian?
Yeah, we always were. From the very early storyboards that I was showing you on the corkboard, we were talking, we want to get Sylvanas in there. We needed somebody to represent for the Horde, because this was supposed to be both sides momentarily putting aside hostilities in the face of this greater threat. And so we just thought she'd be perfect for doing it. And what was the other half of your question? I'm sorry.
What do you think she was thinking when she was looking out, getting prepared for battle and all stuff at Varian?
Yeah, well, I think what the animators and I talked about was that she was kind of sizing him up and thinking to herself, okay, we agreed to be here for the thing, and I'm here, but I got my eye on you, She doesn't totally trust, but they're here to do a job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hey guys, just want to give you guys props for all your stuff, and I know you guys have found your calling. But my end-up question is other than these cinematics, have you wanted to do a short film for like WoW or Diablo or StarCraft?
Well, I think we get that asked a lot. I think we're always looking to try and do something more than what we're asked. But to be honest, just to put it out there, the game teams have lots of ideas. We have lots of ideas. So right now, that's our focus, is supporting the games, making sure that you have the stories in those games, and that's where we're going to be for now.
Right, thank you.
Hi. Nice job on the cinematic again. And you mentioned something about you used the Diablo 3 cinematic, the quill and the candle holders and stuff. And I was curious if some of the old World of Warcraft cinematic things have found their way into the other cinematics. Like there's a Skull of Gul'dan hidden in the StarCraft trailer.
I can answer some of that. Speaking of one of the skulls, like if you guys remember from, I forget which cinematic was, where Illidan's holding an orc skull in his hands. You can see that repeated several times. It's on the orc ballista machine and the Warlords of Draenor cinematic. But yeah, we recycle all the time. I think that whole, for example, the Warlords, am I saying it right, Draenor? I don't want Chris Metzen coming and finding me later. Yeah, for example, like, we'll just recycle tons of stuff everywhere, and I think about 50% of our environment assets and that, rocks and things like that, were recycled from previous shows. So anywhere we have a chance to do that, we do it all the time. On this one, we didn't have as many opportunities with a lot of the stuff on the top, but I remember talking with Chris, and we needed some candles and other stuff really quick because we didn't have a big budget. And I'm like, I'll find some stuff, throw it in there. So yeah, it's anytime we can do it, love to do it.
If you look in the distance, when you see the gunship, the Warcraft, the Cataclysm Zeppelins are back there. But they could be paintings for all you can't tell.
They're tiny.
Basically, anytime we start a new cinematic, the main character just goes on Craigslist and looks up all the props they're going to need for that show. So, even that chair that's in that cabin is Arcturus' Manx's chair from StarCraft.
Right. That's right. We forgot to mention that.
He just went up and he's like, oh, barely used. Okay, and just picked it up.
All right, thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
I think I can speak for most of us when I say one of our favorite parts of the collector's editions is to get these cinematics on Blu-ray with lossless quality, you know, just a sound effects track, an audio only track, the commentary. But the more collector's editions we get, the more of an ordeal it is to kind of sit down and watch these all in a row. Is there any internal talk of like a, you know, because Pixar has like a collector's edition of like Volume 1 shorts, Volume 2 shorts. Is there any sort of Warcraft collection or StarCraft collection on Blu-ray that you guys have been talking about?
That's a really good question.
It's a good idea.
It's a great idea. Yeah, let's start it. Yeah, I know the feeling you have. On Legion, there are 1,720 hours of behind-the-scenes footage to go through this area. But I think we talked about it. I don't know how farther we've gone than that. I think it's always something that we've mentioned to ourselves, but at this point, we can't say anything or whether or that, but it's a good idea. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Okay, is that it? Oh, well, thank you so much again for coming. I just want to say one other thing, that Cinematics is a huge group. That's just a small smattering of people up here. We'll be happy to answer any of the questions you have. We'll be on the other side of the stage. Have a wonderful BlizzCon 2015. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending the World of Warcraft Cinematics, the Road to Legion panel. Up next, the Blood and Treasure New Content and Features for Reaper of Souls panel.